First of all, thanks everybody for taking your lunch hour to spend with me. I really appreciate that. It's funny because I kind of began this presentation taking a playful dig at people who consume other people's lunch hour. So I'm I'm mildly guilty of doing that, but let's pretend that awkwardness is fun. But what I'll do is I'm going to go through my material. If you have any questions or comments, which I hope you do, I welcome full candor on that. If you could just hang on to that while I'm going through the material, and then we can circle back at the end. I'd love to hear what you have to say. So if I may, for those who don't know who I am, just a super brief introduction. My name is Justin Dauer. I'm the Vice President of Design at bswift, which is a healthcare software firm that's owned by the Fortune 10 CVS Health. I wrote a book called Creative Culture. Earlier this year, the second edition came out. I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. That's where I'm broadcasting from right now. And the most essential points: I love coffee, I wear a lot of denim, and I love Batman. So I'd like to actually begin from outer space with something you likely see every single day in your work life, for better or for worse: the work calendar. And with the calendar, during the course of any given workday, we're often in receipt of or sending out meeting invites, one-on-ones, project kickoffs, stand-ups, regroups, postmortems. You get the point. And very often when you're in the position of sending out a meeting invite, actually finding time on someone's calendar or multiple people's calendars can be very challenging. But then look at that. What's this? Is that a mirage? That noon to 1 block on this person's calendar always seems to be open. And this is a moment of decision. This time is available, but should you take it? And ultimately, this is like when you're looking for a parking spot and everyone is wondering why that perfect spot was missed, but it ends up being where a fire hydrant is. It's open for a reason. And people leave this open because, believe it or not, they like to decompress. That decompression typically manifests itself in what we like to call lunch. The core of that is pausing with intent. It's taking time to refuel. Or it's taking time to connect with coworkers. Or go for a walk. Or really do whatever they want. It's your right. It's a human right. And to respect that notion is to be compassionate. Recognizing your coworker's lunchtime and not consuming it with a whiteboarding session or retrospective or design review. Now let's talk design actually and consider what we'll call, I guess, a typical mobile first UX process. And this is by no means all encompassing or all inclusive. There are a million different facets and iterations of this. This is very macro. But let's just take a look at this. There's a project inception. There's a discovery process, usually inclusive of user interviews and user research, competitor analysis, et cetera. Within that sphere is the actual mobile first UX process: sketching and wireframing, the tangible artifacts, that come from that: content strategy, usability testing, iterating, and then responsive design based out from that, how something refactors itself amongst a myriad of viewport sizes. But when we look closer at that main circle, there's another side baked into this process, and that's the people first side, the engagement side. Research, as we talked about, artifacts from that, personas, giving a soul ultimately to a journey map, testing and iterating very cyclically. Again, these are very broad. What these things equate to at the end of the day is empathy. There is a value behind why we do what we do in this process. So when we say mobile first, for example, we mean empathy. We mean people first. We're also being compassionate towards humans in designing in this manner. For example, is someone engaging with our experience while holding a smartphone with one hand on the subway? Or are they interacting with a vital workflow in the midst of a crisis? Or are they managing account information on an archaic terminal on a noisy factory floor? Or are they in a low reception area or in receipt of poor bandwidth? I could rattle these off all day. The possibilities are infinite, and therein lies the challenge in what we do, the challenge in our craft. And let's get even more micro for a second. I mentioned personas before, and talk about why we create them in UX design. Across discovery and user interviews and research, we're putting ourselves in the shoes of others to understand what they want and how they feel. We're building empathy for those we are creating for. And personas, like I said, are given a soul, I air quotes that, through discovery and user interviews, and ultimately bring a journey map to life in the same manner. And I've presented this slide before. I have Barbara Gordon, who's Batgirl, and that brutality is a little high, so I'm gonna take that down a little bit. Somebody's dinged me on that before. So why am I talking about a calendar or lunch or design process or personas, all within the same 5-minute block? The reason is that there's an intrinsic synergy at play here: empathy and compassion, both in cultural interactions as well as the manner in which we create. Compassion toward our coworkers and teammates and those we're creating for in our design process. It's about people first. And the notion of being people first has an innate synergy between design process and ultimate product, and office culture and empathetic interactions. And the wonderful thing is that the benefit of both dynamics, and to people both inside and outside of the office, those touch points are identifiable and they're exploitable. As I said, it's a benefit to those we're designing with and those we're designing for. And yes, at the end of the day, this is about basic human decency. It's about treating others the way you want to be treated. That old formative lesson from our grade school days about putting yourself in the shoes of someone else. It's about how you're humbly supporting your teammates, or how you're inclusively engaging human beings in the design process. And the beautiful part of, quote, people first, is that it's also about value to the ultimate product and of value to the business. Evolving, upsizing, maintaining, or supporting anything at scale, and I'm talking about culture and design practice in this instance, within a larger organization is predicated upon results and their value to the business. For example, a healthy culture means employee retention. People feel engaged, they don't want to leave. It also means brand equity. Brand and culture are absolutely synonymous. What happens inside the walls absolutely bleeds to how the public views what the brand is outside the walls. It also means organic marketing from the very people engaged with and supported by the culture. People feel challenged and supported, they will talk about it on social media and to their friends and to their family. And of course, happiness equates to increased productivity. On the design side, it equates to quality and end product, or how intuitive X is to engage with. If we're being inclusive of human beings throughout the process, there should be no curveballs once we hit a release cycle, we unleash the product into the wild. Or the overall adoption of a product. If it's intuitive, people want to use it. And of course, the hallmark of people first design is innovation. These things are measurable. And just as data should inform our design process over a driving decision, metrics inform the conversation of, quote, value to the organization when advocating for an evolution. And in previous roles, as well as the one I'm currently in, I've utilized this approach when building and growing a design practice, as well as elevating healthy culture from the team level to the organization level. In both instances, the human connection leads. And in both instances, cost and resources are needed from the business to facilitate the change. So what this means is I'm not going to my boss, who happens to be the CTO of the business I'm at, and I'm not just saying I want to change the way my team's process is or hire a few more people because it feels right. It feels like it's the right thing to do. I'm going there with analytics. I'm going there with metrics. And I've measured these things about how I change how my team works. And when it comes down to the business level, metrics and analytics ultimately talk. Empathy and compassion as a leverageable synergy between practice and process. It's just one example about how being unified in a people-first, human-centered manner is incredibly valuable. Now, in Swedish culture, there's the concept of fika, which means to more or less take time out during the day for a coffee and a bite to eat. However, it's much deeper than that. It's time to catch up with a friend and to interact as human beings. It's time reserved specifically for taking a break. And fika is such an important thing to Swedes, and in fact, that it's ultimately and often built into many employee contracts. It is the definition of pausing with intent. There's a magazine called Drift that I subscribe to that covers coffee culture globally, and their Stockholm edition aptly put it. Quote, fika is the thread that weaves Swedish social customs together, and it's the ultimate nod to the idea of slow living. In our fast-paced world, where we are constantly on deadline or planning our schedules around meetings and events, we crave opportunities to slow down. Swedes actually embrace those opportunities. So fika is about slowing down, and like I said, the act of pausing during a typical day and making time to have a dialogue with someone, though a good cup of coffee is, of course, a vital part. For my department, I ensure that this time is not only a known quantity within my team's creative culture, but that it's protected and actively utilized. So I'm not just saying this exists, I encourage my team to actually utilize that time so they feel supported to do so. So within culture, the act of pausing with intent facilitates connection and recalibration. Now, instead of getting a product manager's PowerPoint wireframe in your inbox with a request to, quote, make it look nice, which is a dagger to all of our hearts, I'm sure, or a client's request to crank out a design for their approval by end of day, we have to slow down to understand the people who will be interacting with our design and the design's potential impact on others, the environment, the community in which it will be utilized, and so on. Rushing to get something done to tick an account manager's client appeasement box at the expense of the human experience is to sacrifice empathy, quality, and as I said before, any prospect of potential innovation. So when people first design, before producing any sort of tangible artifact, the vital process of discovery helps researchers and designers genuinely understand people they're creating for and the issues they're up against. They're taking the necessary time to listen, learn, research, and question. This process at the beginning of an initiative directly informs overall quality of a product at its completion. So in a unified sense, in culture and design, slowing down, pausing with intent, putting people first. When we think of the process in onboarding a new hire, typically businesses ask their new employee to start on a Monday. And the logic there being that there's 5 days stretching ahead for natural momentum. Perhaps for training or orientation, often in a large group setting. Perhaps being lobbed right into project work, hopefully not. That's happened to me more than once, and I surmise is unfortunately not uncommon broadly or to people on this call today. For my part, I prefer to welcome a new teammate on a Friday, so a different kind of momentum is produced. It's an energy culled from putting the individual first and making the welcoming experience personal over clinical. So the dynamic is less cattle call and more one-on-one dialogue driven, and teeing up the weekend directly after is no coincidence. As we discussed earlier in the leveraging of personas and their application of journey maps, giving a soul to the process. And I call this Friday the new day one. And we can give a soul to the process of welcoming a new teammate by treating them like a human being. And to that end, I like to break the new day one out into 4 distinct parts. Acclimation. When somebody comes in, I am not leaving them to flounder in a remote or in-person capacity, sometime in the new year, I assume. So if someone is tangibly walking in the door, and we've all been in that circumstance where you walk in and you see other people and they know one another and there are cliques formed and there are people hanging out by the coffee machine, there's no one there to greet me. When someone joins my team, I am out of my seat. I don't have any meetings planned. I'm not playing words for friends on my phone. I am there greeting this person. I'm welcoming them. They are entrusting me with their evolution and the propelling forward of their career. And I am going to show them that I appreciate that. So I'm welcoming them in, giving them the lay of the land, showing them where people can work, where the mother's room is, very tangible things like that. Conversation. When someone comes in, I take them to their desk, and it's not like, we're wondering, can we find a computer for this person? Is there something laying around, or their computer set up? Their mouse is there. Maybe there's a signed note from the team, everyone welcoming them. And when this new employee joins us and sits at the table or sits at a desk near us, a natural conversation and a dialogue happens. How can I, customize my machine, or I need this software, and someone's right there to help them out. And we will go to lunch. Of course, this is, kind of new day or standard first date fare, but we're not thinking, where should we go to lunch today? Is there something around here? No, there's a reservation is already teed up. We know where we're going. We know it's a place we've been to before. And again, we're being empathetic. We're putting ourselves in this person's shoes. We want to look like we appreciate this person joining us. So everything's going to be teed up. Everything's going to be in a natural sequence. This is a person, and we would like to connect with this person as a human being and as a teammate. So we'll go to lunch, and we'll keep it light, talking about fairly benign things as people are talking between bites of food. And then we'll go to a cafe and have a coffee or tea, and we'll talk shop. We'll talk about process, clients, how we work, what the work is that we're doing. Inspiration, I'll come back to that in a second. And at the end of the day is reflection. And that reflection, I feel, is best obtained via the weekend and not coming back on a Tuesday and getting right into work. I want people to take what is a day, hopefully unlike a first day they've had before, and think about the demonstrative aspects of how we've shown that we appreciate them, and perhaps talk to their friends and their family. But let's get back to the inspiration part. When we're having coffee and after we've talked shop, the inspiration portion today is kind of the most important thing. And what I will do is I will ask that person who's joining my team, take me someplace in the city that inspires you. And by and large, they do. For example, on the left, I asked someone when they joined our team, they were a front-end developer, to take me someplace that inspires them. And they took me to the side of the train tracks in downtown Chicago, where they would be driving to work in the morning in their previous role with their partner. And there was this fleeting glimpse of this incredible graffiti and this print work done on the side of the train tracks. And they would always look forward to and remember that glance as they were driving by, in probably a 15-second window. Or on the right side, a designer who joined my team took me to this area just a little bit south of the city, where you could get a good view of the skyline of Chicago. Or a view in a park nearby, where if you look at the trees, you got this very specific framing of these beautiful lavender flowers on a tree behind it. And another time, a researcher took me to the Field Museum. And we're not just arriving at these spots and I say, oh, this is cool, Field Museum. Okay, have a great weekend. No, it's much deeper than that. And depth is what this is all about. This yields insight into someone's drive and their passions and their creative process far more than a portfolio of work could ever yield. This is about the personal experiences that transcend the surface level and help shape who they are and why they do what they do today. So for example, again, observation. This person who was driving by observed this, probably from 200 feet away, this very specific piece of graffiti on the side of the train tracks every single day. This caught their eye as they were driving by. Empathy. This person who took me to the south side of the city was going through a change of career and a change of life. And they were in the finance industry. And what they knew was that they wanted to connect with people. When they worked in finance, in banking, that's the core part of the role. They knew if they got into UX, that would afford them the means to do that. Detail. This little view in this park, this person noted how they would always, when they were walking their dog, catch the same glimpse every time, and notice how the flowers changed during the year when they fell off the tree And they would always pause and notice that. And a researcher took me to the Field Museum, and they noted that when their parents took them there when they were younger, they would puzzle over archaeology and the detail behind studying a process and what that kind of research would ultimately yield at the end. So the new day one concept evolves an employee's first day from formulaic and sterile into directly personal and custom. And via the inspiration portion and venturing away from the office, we gain insight into a new team member as an individual that transcends what folio work can yield. What physical aspects of their selected location have impacted who they are? How did it impact their way of creating or approaching problems? Understanding the spatial dynamics and their impact on an individual is vital toward an individualistic and ultimately holistic view. Ethnographic research provides an environmental context to human interaction that a video conference interview often cannot yield. And through direct observation, ethnography is the qualitative study of human beings in their native environment. Is the individual sitting in a high traffic area in an office, causing frequent distraction from their work? Are they a field worker, primarily utilizing a mobile device in direct sunlight, yielding paramount color contrast needs? These are things that are very challenging to ascertain from a bullet list on a piece of printed paper. Spatial dynamics are absolutely key to ethnographic research. So by making research truly human, we gain an understanding of how those we observe see the world and how they ultimately engage with it. We also attain a physical and spatial understanding of human to human and human to experience interactions. So as a commonality and synergy again in culture and design, understanding the impact of spatial dynamics on an individual is vital towards that individualistic and holistic view. Less clinical and formulaic, as I said, more wide-lensed and personal. And a few minutes ago, I cited how the inspiration portion of the new day one affords that insight into someone's passion and creative process. But I want to talk about that for a second. Despite what you may have read on design Twitter, inspiration is not a swear word. Inspiration's vital attributes are where it comes from, how it's ultimately leveraged, and how it aligns to your values. There is an entire world of design and inspiration beyond the context the digital world affords us. And though, quote, thinking outside the box is somewhat of a hack term at this point, the sentiment is genuine. That box is our MacBook Pros. And that soft glow of a retina display locks our gaze and in turn our bodies and our minds. So, quote, taking a break often just means clicking over to a different screen. And I'm sometimes guilty of this myself, and that process has a pattern. Design block hinders momentum. I get stuck. I'm not giving myself those fresh eyes that I desperately need. So what's the easy thing to do? Best of collections populate a barrage of new browser tabs. This daily winner or that nominee. And via minimal effort, I've ascertained mass audience approved web fonts and grid patterns and content integrations and design system examples. And it goes on and on. Responsive navigational system libraries, app UI interaction snippets, all ripe for the picking. My thought processes and my synapses enjoy their coffee break. In large part, our livelihoods exist in these spaces, derived viewports. And it really creates a sort of tunnel vision of stagnation and complacency. The biggest opportunity in the world is to look beyond those glowing boxes and let the world around us and the humans within generate that spark and connection. Now let's start with the world around us. And in a place we've all likely been, one of my favorite places, in fact, a cafe. Now this barista is going through a very detailed process. They're tamping down the grounds. They're getting the pour and the crema just right. Preceding this was the careful selection of the roast. Ultimately, you're tasting the end product, the fruit of someone's labor and their attention to detail. It's the act of going through a process that ultimately yields quality. And this act, process to quality, directly aligns to a discovery process, taking the necessary time to listen, learn, research, and question. This process at the beginning of an initiative directly informs overall quality of a product at its completion. And a cafe is familiar, but let's consider environments much more alien than that. In a previous role I occupied, I planned and ran offsite camps for our designers and our developers. This particular camp, from what you're looking at here, was called X Camp, and the X was intended to be a variable to say that this could take place effectively anywhere. But this one specifically was held in Moab, Utah. And Moab is the home of Arches National Park. This is a picture I snapped the last time I was there, and it's kind of one of those locations where you can spin in any direction and take a beautiful wallpaper caliber picture. And there's been many films made here before, lots of John Wayne films, the introduction to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, if you can recall that. It's remote, but it's modern enough. And as you can tell, the landscape is almost surreal. There are absolute massive natural stone structures that dwarf just about anything you've ever seen in the midst of pin drop silence around you. So for this X Camp, I put an open invitation out to the business, all roles, all levels of seniority to come on a trip with limited capacity. And in fact, I didn't even tell them where we were going. So a dozen brave souls from our different offices, this was an international design agency, rose to the occasion, and they were intrigued enough and trustful enough, I should say, to join me. And it was in Moab where I picked the Dauer Ranch, which is just outside of Arches National Park. And amongst a few cabins, we cooked for one another, and we explored the grounds, and we hiked together. And most of all, we collaborated and we created. The wireless here, terrible, but terrible by intent. I wasn't taking people there to play Fortnite or to browse the web. It was passable enough to check your email once a day, or to send a text if you needed to. But by and large, that was not the point of why we went here. And the first day at X Camp was not spent designing. Instead, I planned a hiking excursion to what is called the Fiery Furnace, where, as a team plus a guide, we explored nature and observed shape and form, and we collaborated amongst the terrain. When we weren't hiking or exploring, we workshopped against core issues in our process and our business back home. For example, I sent a couple of developers out walking across the horizon one afternoon who were having trouble getting into it, so to speak, to get away from their laptops. And they ended up driving database diagrams in the red Utah sand with their fingers to capture a process. So this wasn't truly all fun and games. As I said, we worked, we collaborated, we formed teams across varied levels of seniority and discipline. And just as when you run a workshop, varied levels of seniority and discipline inform diverse thinking. The intent here was to build something that we could use and leverage back in our respective offices. And artifacts were produced. For example, the beginnings of an HR app to streamline calendar submissions and document uploading. An internally facing cultural statement document. At the time when I took this team there, this was a Swedish design agency, and we were in the process of being integrated into a larger Nordic holding company. So there were some concerns within the business about, is our cultural identity going to be compromised or lost? And people needed to get that out. They needed some catharsis to put something together, and it kind of ultimately became this artifact, this cultural statement document. And a list of quality of life improvements and their subsequent effort involved. This connection between environment to team and team to teams yielded people returning to their home offices recharged. Invigorated and inspired by their global coworkers, they acted as living embodiments of their culture. The projects worked on at this X camp continued as formal entities once we were back at our desks, which kept the momentum going. And teams functioned more effectively, having worked toward common goals and made deeper personal connections. People first, design and business value. In an environment that inspired us, we also inspired one another as a team. And that's a valuable concept, inspiration by people. Though this locale was unique, consider your daily commute and the things you might see along the way. For example, while walking to work, suppose you see this guy. And this fancy costumed fellow is likely heading to stop a criminal or hold up a bridge, or is probably up to something pretty darn important. But what is he doing instead? He's pausing to take time. He's pausing to help someone else with directions, a stranger. He's likely been that stranger at some point. This is a clear, spontaneous moment of empathy. And in fact, these moments are all around us. And all the observation-centric inspiration we've discussed at this point, be it spontaneous or curated, has direct leverageable value toward the quality of our design work. Training ourselves on how to document these moments to later be processed as fuel is where the magic begins and the value is derived. Now, recently I was invited to speak in Sweden at international agency Futurice's Design Day. And Futurice has offices across Europe and Scandinavia, including Helsinki, Tampere, London, Berlin, Munich, and Stockholm. And for this event, they flew in all designers from all their locations. I think this is the first time, in fact, all their designers had actually met one another face to face. And Design Day was a varied program of inspiration from people representing different forms of media. There was an image maker and a publisher, an award-winning sound designer, an entrepreneur dedicated to representing Muslim women and shaping thought and acting as a tool for cultural change, and yours truly. And in addition to speaking on the methodologies in my book to kick off the day's events at 2 a.m. Chicago time, no less, running a workshop on harnessing and leveraging inspiration was my contribution to the afternoon program. As designers and researchers, we have an implicit requirement to observe the human beings we're created for, connect with them, and engage them in our process and design. And this very exercise that I'm going to talk about can be run in the comfort of your own workplace or home to help your team train their eyes and develop some simple, effective, observation-based habits. As much as this was about the Futurist team training their eyes and minds, it was about the human connection. People sharing their stories and an organic, evolving dialogue. This broke down barriers for many who didn't know one another previously or speak the same language, having arrived from different international cities and offices. Let's take a look at this workshop. The framework netted out like this. This is a simple mapped journey, or journey map, if you will, of a person's day from commuting to work, to pausing at a cafe in this example, to the process of actual creation and design back at the office. Now in the buckets for commute and pause, I wanted people to cite something that they had observed, and the next column, what their takeaway was from that observation. For example, as we saw at Spider-Man, pausing to give directions is the observation, and the takeaway is empathy. Where the magic happens in Create, the columns change a bit. The takeaways are redubbed fuel, and that fuel is directly associated to an opportunity where it can be leveraged. I'll walk through how this unfolds with examples in a moment. The large circles at the top were intended to be the home of visual interest for this exercise, so we're just writing on a 7-foot sheet of paper. To stimulate conversation and intrigue, it had to be something tangible and something relatable. And for that intrigue, I leveraged the power of Lego and a little bit of taste of home. And if you can imagine, bringing a constructed Lego of the city of Chicago on a flight to Sweden did not pan out well. So I was in the hotel room putting Legos together for the first 3 hours. So commute in this instance equals city. Chicago skyline, as I said. Pausing with intent is a cafe. And creation back at the office via a desk and some coffee. Now let's walk through this exercise in practice. As we said with Spider-Man, we observe someone pausing to give directions. That is the observation. The takeaway from that is empathy. Or when I'm walking through the city and there's this beautiful architecture all around me, I think we both come from cities with lovely architecture. Shape and form. How is the architecture piercing the sky? How did the city planner put these puzzle pieces together? That earlier example I showed of a cafe, the act of making an espresso is the observation. What is the takeaway from that? As I said, process to quality. This person is going through a very deliberate, planned, detailed, focused process, yielding a quality product at the end. When you're in that cafe, there's likely going to be a magazine display at that point. And it's not like, there's People Magazine and Mad and Wired, and it's not usually an eclectic mix. It's very planned. It is curated. It is a curated display. They're trying to get across a specific vibe conducive to chilling out or conducive to what they're trying to get across in that cafe. Now let's align these to the fuel column. What do we have? We have empathy. We have shape and form as a takeaway, process to quality, and curation. What are the opportunities of these takeaways as it relates to design and process? Empathy, journey mapping, as we've said thus far. Aligning a persona to a journey map gives it a workflow, a soul. You're trying to connect with people by going through the process of a journey map. Shape and form, skeletal placement. That's what I like to call a wireframe. Design that is devoid of typography or visuals or images. Defining hierarchies. Process to quality, discovery. As I said before, going through that process of research and questioning and understanding ultimately yields quality at the end. Before pencil touches paper, before sketch is opened, we have all these incredible learnings from the human connection that inform intuitiveness and potentially innovation at the end. And lastly, curation. Content strategy. When we are redesigning a website or an intranet, we are not taking 1,500 pages and putting 1,500 pages into the new site. We're taking a deep look at what content has to come over, what can be archived, how does something render in a mobile first perspective or not render at all on a small device. These are very intentional and specific decisions we are making. These are a couple of pictures of how this exercise manifested in the Swedish workshop. I was really pleased and humbled that these folks trusted me with some of their stories. And like I said, most of these people were unaware of their coworkers before and in a relationships perspective. So sharing it amongst a new group was even more appreciated. But you notice something else in these pictures that I haven't talked about before, these field notebooks. And those are important. So at Design Day, near the conclusion of the workshop, I gave each attendee a Chicago flag branded field notes memo book. And though they imparted a touch of my home while in Scandinavia, for your purposes, the brand and Chicago-ness of the notepad are ultimately irrelevant. What is relevant is the scale and form factor. The target should be the size of an average smartphone, something that could fit in your back pocket. Portability and quick, endless fuel at your desk, on the train or en route to a meeting. A field notes book or a small memo book plus a phone. How do we leverage these? The next time you're in a cafe and you see something like this happening, this moment is yours as long-lasting fuel. So when you see a moment of empathy, or an active process to quality, or a magazine display that's been curated, or the shape and form of architecture piercing the sky, take a picture with your smartphone as non-creepily as you can and jot down the corresponding context of that moment. And if your memo book is at home, add a few words to a consistent text file on your phone instead. So the next time you're sketching hierarchical placement of shape and form for a wireframe, or you're defining the top tasks of a journey map, or you have a few moments before your next conference call gets underway, while everyone asks, can you hear me? Can you see my screen? You'll have these moments of people first fuel, environment first, environment centric, tangible fuel at your fingertips. One last thing about this, take a look at this picture of the crowd I took as people were very early starting to file into my talk. What do you see here? Click, click, click. This is not me clicking my mouse. These are actual tangible clicks. One thing the workshop yielded was this instead. Breaking down barriers, connecting, those bubbles of comfort, of region, or discipline, or previous relationships were melted away. People took these synergies and energy back to their respective offices via the workshop to enhance collaboration. People understood one another better. They were able to connect more intuitively and organically. Now, if I may, I'd like to close out with a brief story, and I really appreciate everyone's patience with me thus far. 20-something years ago, as a high school sophomore, I saw something that changed the course of my life. And it was the album cover designs for the Graphic Design 1 class in the back of my study hall. I approached the study hall proc and asked them about these, and she said it was her class's work. And I had only taken fine art classes to that point, but these covers really connected with me. It was art, but it was visually communicating. And I asked her if I could take her class, and she made the direct point to say this was not fine art. And she set my expectations on what they did do in design. And she said, we're visually problem solving. And rather than dissuading me, that made me hungrier to learn. And so I worked Design 1 into my schedule the next semester. And it was hands-on, low fidelity, pencil, ink, scissors type work. And it was absolutely amazing. The size of the lettering, the texture of the various paper, color usage, tactile construction. It was like something had awakened inside of me. And with full clarity, this was what satiated me. So building a portfolio and getting accepted into the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, I learned and I evolved and I studied from the masters. Gropius, Mueller-Brockman, Suitner. I began to understand the privilege and the responsibility that are inherent in the craft, in communicating and connecting with people through design. Privilege and responsibility. Those notions are so vital and evergreen to our craft and how we connect with other human beings. Formative, yet so intrinsic to what we do. Every decision carries weight and is bigger than us. People who engage with what we build need to be understood, advocated for, and included along the way. And the same for the people we're building with along the way. And that's what this is all about, folks, at the end of the day, people. Putting humans first in our design process and at the workplace yields a successful end product and an endless fountain of inspiration. And if you found this interesting, as we said in the beginning of the presentation, I do have a second edition of my book out in June this year with a foreword by Steve Portugal. It's called Creative Culture, Human-Centered Interaction, Design, and Inspiration. And you can follow me on all the social medias if you thought this was interesting. @pseudoroom is my handle. Pseudoroom.com is my website. It's my personal folio website with all my latest speaking engagements and work. And I do have a bunch of other UXP events coming up, both with this presentation and another one I'm giving called Humility, the Designer's Most Essential Trait. That's what I have. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask. There's only a few of us in here, so I think just unmute yourself and you can ask, or you can pop something in the chat and ask that way as well. I might start off with a question. How have you navigated COVID, or should I say, how has COVID affected your culture development practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, it's a very commonly asked one of late. And what I've found is organically and beautifully, because everything I talked about is underpinned and driven by values. And my values are connection and empathy and humility. Because of that, it fuels a process that has been organic and intuitive to apply both in a tangible and virtual sense. So for example, the new day one, obviously I can't get within 6 feet of someone to take them to a restaurant or take them out anymore. But again, I make sure everything is queued up. So when they start, I make sure that their laptop is at their home on their first day, because we're all working remotely now. And I make sure that their account is all set up. So the same notions of not waiting for anything and everything queued up for someone completely aligns. And when we have lunch that first day, I have my whole team join a video session so we can get that face-to-face connection. And after lunch, I ask someone to show me something that inspires them instead of taking me someplace that inspires them. And the same stuff applies. We talk through, why does that inspire you? How does it inform your creative process and your way of thinking? And the day usually at that point will still end about 2, 3 o'clock. And I'm not saying, okay, this was great, let's get back to work. And then, the day's over at that point. So those same general notions apply. I think as long as you have your values as your North Star, I think these things kind of organically can manifest, virtually or tangibly pretty well.
Cool. Anybody else got a question?
I have a question. Hi, Justin. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. So I work in the nonprofit social services world, and often we have 2 separate audiences that we're targeting, right? We have our constituents, or the people who are benefiting from our services, and then also donors. And so often their agendas are very different. And so sometimes we are not sure who we should, well, I feel like I know who I should prioritize the design for, but sometimes the priorities of the donors outweigh the priorities of our constituents. So how do you find a balance between the 2?
No, that's another tremendous question. I appreciate it. And I can actually identify really well. So I work in what we like to call a B2B2C space. So a lot of our clients are fairly large, which we have to service, like as a business. And then also the people who are the associates who are engaged, like trying to enroll with healthcare, they are also our client. So like you said, we might do user research and user testing, and something might show up in that testing that, let me get a little more macro. We are a software as a service business that if you are going to enroll for your benefits, you are largely probably going to use our system if it's white labeled or otherwise, to pick your healthcare plan and enroll in your benefits. And for example, or let's say this is fictional. There was an example where we did some user testing, and plans should have netted out as they filtered out in one capacity, but the business wanted something else to filter to the top. And it was trying to find a means of educating the business on what is probably the most intuitive way in balance with what they were looking to ultimately render. And a lot of that is educating the client services team. Working as a design team myself, it's like there's the client services team who manages the client relationship, and they know what the client needs. They handle all the day-to-day calls. And then there's me on the design side as the VP of design. I don't have direct access to the client all the time. So to get the client team to play ball. I have to educate the client team as that middleman between myself and the client on what the value is of what we're doing and who else in the marketplace is doing something similar to this in case they have to bring it up and show it. So there's all these kinds of checks and balances, I feel, to validate an approach via those who sign the checks and those who are actually engaging with the experience. That can often be very challenging. And it's a muddy answer because I feel like it's a muddy process. I don't feel like there's any clean answer there. In the 20-something years I've been doing this, I still haven't kind of found the secret sauce there. But I feel like as long as you have the user at heart and it doesn't come at the expense of the business. I've found this before where I've advocated for something and it's like, yeah, but the business has to do, the business pays to keep the lights on. The business has to do this. There's usually like a middle ground there between, the spectrum. There's an area in the middle where you can kind of try to find a common ground, but this is often a process that's easier said than done. So I apologize for the long-winded answer, but I feel like it's kind of a very fuzzy case-by-case kind of situation. It's really one I exist with, and like you every day. I'm not in the social sector like you are, but dealing with Facebook-sized businesses and wanting to make them happy as well as Facebook employees happy. Facebook is not a client of ours. I'm just saying. That's a difficult challenge, and it's one I respect, and I'm sorry, it's one I can't give a better answer for.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for your question, Cameron. Anybody else have a question for Justin? Feel free to ask.
And this does, if people are, on their lunch break or they're not feeling chatty today, that's fine. I respect that, of course. But this can be an ongoing dialogue. You have my social media handles. You have my website. I'm happy to chat with anybody after the fact. If you'd like to shoot me a message, we don't have to put the full burden of conversation right now. So, even after this, feel free to reach out with questions. I'm happy to chat.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for this really enlightening presentation. I find it really interesting to take our kind of design practices of, user first or human centered design and actually translate it now back into our work, not necessarily what we're producing, but how we're doing it. Right. And so that was really fascinating. I just wish I was in a better position to utilize some of these tools since I'm not a hiring manager, but I think I can take the concept a little bit further in our area. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that, Nick. And even if you are at the team level and say, there's a meeting that's during the week that is always going to be a challenging one. It's with an internal client team or something. There are political issues. And say before that meeting, you started with your team putting like an hour coffee break right in advance of that. You're not working, you're not billing, but you put something to kind of chill everybody out in advance of that. If you can take an observation of that or put metrics against it. So we have put this hour meeting in advance to kind of chill out and collaborate as a team. We went into that politically charged meeting, we came out, but because we had that, good vibe going into it, our productivity increased by 3%, or we were able to get back into the game 10% quicker. With analytics like that, even if you're not like a team leader or a manager or have a C something on your business card, I think as long as you have metrics or data to back you up and you take it to a manager and you say, look, we're now billing this hour, but we were able to get back to work 10% faster. I think that really helps advocate change at any level, even if you don't, have a senior title on your business card. Just a thought.
I could probably
your background's really, really chilling me out, by the way. I like your background. It's giving me a good vibe.
I could probably develop my question a little bit more to see if you have any ideas. And, again, getting back to COVID, have you seen much, it's probably a hard thing to quantify, but have you seen much degradation in terms of, the quality of work or the quality of relationships because people are working so remotely? And what are some ways that you found that really benefit people's creative process, the development of product, as we're working, in such isolated ways? Like we can't even go to a cafe a lot of times, so people are spending so much more time at home. You got
Yeah,
any thoughts on that?
let's go back to values. Respect is another core value of mine. I suspect most people on this call as well. And going to a cafe and saying to someone, work wherever you want to do your best work, that is an aspect of respect and trust. I'd say to a team member, if you work the best at home, if you work best by the lake, if you work best outside, that's cool. Go get your work done. That's in normal circumstances. Now that we are remote, that same value of respect applies. So asynchronous working, for example, my entire team works asynchronously. I don't expect someone's butt to be in their seat from 9 to 5. People have kids. People have kids at home. People are acting like a teacher as well as an employee. You can't expect someone to be at their desk all day. So that is one way that we are applying a value in a remote capacity. And we're also being mindful of how many meetings we have. When we first started working remotely, we were overdoing it in the Zooms. We have to get this FaceTime in and we want to see each other. And it was just Zoom fatigue. Like we were on meetings all day and everyone, then eventually we noticed cameras started turning off more. People started engaging less. And we were like, okay, we have to scale that back because we took a humble look at our process and we don't want to impose Zoom Fest 2020 on everyone every single day. So I think as long as, like I said, I don't mean to sound super kumbaya and super repetitive, but if you have those values that drive your decision-making, really nothing but good things come from that. So, we're all learning. I was completely guilty of zooming my team to death when we first started because I was hoping people would collaborate more and that wasn't working. Like I said, it was burning out. So now we scaled it back a lot. We put that async working in place. And that seems to be doing the trick a bit more, but I need to be I have to be continually self-evaluating. I have to be continually listening to my team's feedback and taking it humbly and accepting my mistakes and admitting my mistakes as I do things like that. So it's a learning process to your question. I don't have all the answers and we're learning as we go, but I think as long as respect to my team drives it, we'll be in a good spot.
That's good. Thank you. Was there somebody else that had a question there before we did that answer? I thought I heard somebody piping up. Maybe not.
That's all right.
Well, this has
You know
been
where to find me.
great. Yeah, this has been great, Justin. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I really appreciate, I know this was, like I said, over everyone's lunch hour, so I appreciate you spending some time with me.
And so people can find you on Instagram at pseudo-room.
Same handle everywhere, Instagram,
Okay.
Twitter, everywhere.
Okay, great. And for everybody still on, stay in touch with us. Keep checking our website, uxpa.kc.org, and we are putting up events up there all the time. And we might potentially get you back again, Justin, for a part 2. I know you've expressed some interest in doing that. So what might that subject matter be, do you think?
I think there's so many themes here that we could take a deeper dive into, even, if it was more of a roundtable panel-y kind of thing, and we talk more about how to apply these values in a remote capacity. I think anything that's more timely and would yield value towards the new year, since we're closing the year out, I'd be interested in something like that. But I'd also love to hear from, your membership as well. Maybe there's something they'd like to hear from too.
Yeah.
Something that's just on my mind is how can these ideas be deployed at different sized companies? Especially companies that are maybe smaller, or even in like a freelance capacity too, with clients or what have you. I wonder what that might look like.
Yeah, that's a meaty one. And like I said, we have 2 daddies effectively. So we're bswift. We are owned by Aetna. Aetna is owned by CVS Health. So we have tiers of mammoth companies on top of us. And like I said, CVS Health is like a Fortune 5 or 6 companies. So I've been able to sell. That sounds a little devious. I'd be able to advocate for these ideas to up the chain because I do tie data and metrics behind it. We did this, and look what happened. Retention increased. Our productivity. We did this. We did this. So there are ways to do it. Like I said, I cited that example to Nick earlier about doing something at the team level even. So there's macro and micro level examples. That's another great topic.
Yeah, that is a great topic because I think that's a good question. Like, how can you quantify living this way or working this way? Because because it is a slower way of production, but often it yields a better result, right?
Exactly.
So backing it up with data and so on.
Tom, I'm almost thinking like UXPA. If we were to do a case study of what would this look like for UXPA and the board, and also just people attending our events too. So just to get meta with it.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you again, Justin. Great to have
Thank
you
you
on.
all.
Hope to see you in the new year.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone, for
everybody.
joining.
Appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.